Welcome to the Sustainable Solar Podcast. Today we have another amazing guest, Mr. Michael Hughes. How are you, sir?
Very good. Happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Michael has actually a background in cybersecurity, and we're going to talk about exactly how that matches and how that links up with the solar industry. I'm sure you'll be very open, but also pleasantly surprised how the two worlds actually match, right? So, Mr. Hughes, how did you actually get into this industry?
I sort of fell into it. It was the natural evolution of my previous career in advertising. And so I worked for one company that had a background in privacy, a pretty storied background in privacy. And while working for that company, the work that they were doing in privacy really gelled with my own ideas about privacy. And I just found myself working more in that direction. So pivoting towards that direction. So after studying privacy and cybersecurity, it became my main area of work.
Awesome. And I know, obviously, we've known each other for a while,
Yes.
right? And I know, you have you have different backgrounds and different things, also in the legal field as well. But yeah, what really interests you most about cybersecurity?
Well, really, it's the privacy aspect of it, because while I do have some background in cybersecurity, the bulk of my background is in privacy law and privacy protections for the individuals. What this really touches on is being able to give people what are called equal protections as it relates to privacy. So being able to make sure that their information is safe, making sure that the information that they provide to companies is safe. And safe meaning that the information about them can't be used to harm them. And that's something that I find really, really interesting, because that's essentially the point of freedom, really, is being able to be safe from anyone interfering with what it is you do, and then interfering with what it is you do in a way that can potentially harm you.
Absolutely. Okay. And I know with us now happily coming out of the pandemic, over the past 2 years, just in general, there's been a lot of privacy issues and situations that's been going on, not only for homeowners, but just everybody, right? You want to elaborate about that a little bit, maybe?
Sure. Again, without touching too deep on the pandemic itself, because people have very strong emotions one way or another, we can just look at certain aspects of being able to re-enter society, coming into the new normal, as it were. So one of the things that really stands out is the use of these vaccine passports. Sometimes they might be on the mobile phone. Other times they might be the actual vaccine card itself. But more places have adopted the use of some type of documentation that they want people to show as a condition of being able to participate, whether that's going to the restaurant, whether that's going to the movie theater, whether that's getting your temperature checked. These are things that have previously been considered the domain of privacy. Like a vaccine passport or vaccine card is a medical document, right? So in what other situation would you bring your whole medical transcript to show that, you're safe to enter? It's taken on that level where you're starting to have to consider, especially with regards to the digitizing of that information on certain apps, like, for example, New York State's Excelsior app, which takes the information on your vaccine card and then digitizes it so that you can present it conveniently as a barcode or whatever to the establishment that you want to enter. The privacy aspect there is that the information is being stored someplace other than in your pocket or, in your wallet or whatever. You're trusting a company to protect that information by encrypting it, storing it, and making sure nobody else can access it. You might be wondering, well, it's just a vaccine. It's just showing that you've been vaccinated. Yeah, but depending on the person who's looking at the information or accessing the information, the concern is how that person might be accessing the information to identify who you are or to identify things about you that could be compromised. So for people, for example, who have had to get the booster shot, not everyone gets the 3 shots. But if someone were to access your vaccine card and see that you have the 3 shots, that might suggest to the person that you're in some way immunocompromised. Now, that might be something that is a critical point of information for people, for example, who happen to work for the government or who happen to be what are called high-level targets or priority targets in high-profile companies, for example. So being able to protect the information, especially from what might be considered trivial uses, and just trying to get into a movie theater. These are some of the things that as a society, we've been trying to grapple with and understand what they could mean in the long term.
Absolutely, absolutely. And, one of the next questions I wanted to ask is basically how, cybersecurity kind of, what's the effects of cybersecurity on the solar industry for homeowners, for people looking to go into solar. Obviously, we live in a time right now where there's a lot of things happening all over the world, a lot of hacking, a lot of people being compromised from the electrical standpoint, right? We see what happened in Texas with their whole grid shutting down and homeowners not having access to electricity. So I definitely want to touch on some of those aspects specifically. But what I want to do right now is just take a quick break, and then we'll be able to jump into those questions as soon as we come back.
That's excellent. Cool.
All right. We'll see you guys in a few.
The process of going solar was fairly easy. We sat down and we spoke about planning and what we needed to get and what would be the actual steps in setting up from roof security, like building up the roof if we had to, or if your roof was stable enough, and setting up what we needed. So everything went pretty much smooth. I can't complain that the process was too hard at all.
So welcome back to the Sustainable Solar podcast with our guest here, Mr. Hughes. I know we spoke earlier about how the connection of cybersecurity, how it actually matched with the solar industry in today's day and age, and kind of like bridging that gap for homeowners, but people all around to understand how the two areas affect. I just want to read a quote from Energy Sage that talks a little bit about what we're actually discussing in today's podcast. And also we can kind of like start a conversation from this. So basically in 2015, Ukraine experienced the first known cyber attack on the power grid, which caused outages for at 30 substations throughout the country and left about 230,000 people without electricity for 6 hours. Once again, that's from Energy Sage. So how exactly does something like this happen?
The reality is countries have an interest, especially, rival countries, have an interest in being able to access, monitor, control each other's energy sources. And so in terms of how this happens, it's believed that the aggressor country in the Ukraine story maintains state-funded hackers, and that these hackers working on behalf of the country work to breach the infrastructure and cause problems. It's as simple as that. And so what allows this type of thing to happen is when there's some type of defect, either in process, so that means the rules that the organization is supposed to follow, defect in personnel, meaning that they can't necessarily trust the people, or that the people aren't properly trained to protect access to the systems, or there's a defect in the technology, that the technology itself may not be as up to date as it needs to be. These are just some of the few aspects where you need to make sure that things are as strong, as secure as they need to be to reduce the likeliness of risk that could result in a breach or a hack by, well-funded, well-equipped sources or bad actors.
Wow. And, once again, just reading from the article, it says that over 230,000 people were affected. And this is in Ukraine. Just makes me wonder if something like this could happen in the U.S., maybe even specifically a city like New York City. Like, if it happened in that area, like, what do you think would be the effects?
Those are all really great questions. And these are things that our government thinks about all the time. The Department of Homeland Security thinks about this all the time. And one of our agencies, CISA, they're tasked with trying to assess and, figure out how to address these issues if they should ever arise. New York City, for example, is a high priority target because it has so many people, because the risk is so great, because the way that their infrastructure is so intertwined. I mean, you think about an energy attack on New York City's power grid, that's going to affect the subway, that's going to affect the delivery of healthcare, that's going to affect the flow of information. New York City, as the nation's, if not the world's, financial center, that means that this is going to affect the flow of commerce, across state lines and internationally. You don't want Wall Street to get hit with a power outage affecting the flow of data from its trading servers, for example. So the United States is working on trying to recruit the most talented people that it can. It's doing its best to provide training and to provide resources that companies can use. It's partnering with other countries around the world, for example, with the European Union. They actually, this administration has just agreed to a new, what's called Privacy Shield framework that governs how the United States and the countries in the European Union are going to work together to ensure privacy. Now, privacy is a little different from cybersecurity. When cybersecurity, we're really talking about protecting systems, and with privacy, we're talking about protecting the information in those systems. But to the original question, in terms of how might protecting information systems like those of New York City's infrastructure, you're talking about being able to make sure that the personnel, the processes, and the systems are hardened, and hardened meaning that they have tough security protocols, and that they're trained enough to be able to work in harmony to prevent bad actors from being able to get into the systems, and that if they do get into the systems, preventing them from being able to access the information in those systems to affect, catastrophic breaches that could result in people being hurt, people's reputations being hurt, or businesses' reputations being hurt. So this is where the overlap with an energy independent system. One of the things that you're doing, which is still, it's low tech, but low tech is high tech in that when you can cut off access, when you can isolate the system, then you increase the chances of protecting the system and protecting the people who those systems are designed to provide value or perform for.
Absolutely. And, as I'm listening to you say that, I'm really thinking like one of the biggest ways for specifically homeowners in this situation, as far as how to protect themselves against an energy attack, is to literally be self-sustainable.
Absolutely.
Right. Obviously, connecting the dots with these, basically having yourself open to these attacks that could take place in reality. Having a household that may have solar and storage, right, kind of prevents you and kind of like knocks you off of the grid, right? And what that would do is in these situations where these attacks could potentially happen, these homeowners would still have access to electricity and also be off of the grid so their information doesn't get kind of like sent out to everyone else. Because you were mentioning earlier how basically energy companies, utility companies, basically get information from homeowners based on how much electricity they use throughout the day and throughout the month and things of that nature. Is that correct?
Correct. The old-fashioned way for energy companies to collect information about homeowners' usage was to send an actual human being out to their house and take a meter reading. And that human being at the end of the month would document how many kilowatt hours of energy usage your household used. There would be no way for them to know at what point during the month, at what point during any day in the month your usage was peaking, right? But now energy companies are using smart meters. And what the smart meters do, they do the same thing that the old meters do. They collect the information in terms of how many kilowatt hours of energy the household is using, but they're also sending the information wirelessly. So there's no need for a human being to come and actually read the meter. They're using the same technology that cell phones use. So they're sending they're transmitting this information about your energy usage to the wireless company, and the wireless company is collecting that information, and then they're using that to bill you. One of the measures that energy companies are taking, and we can applaud them for this, is by trying to use that information to set their own processes to provide power in places that need it when it's needed, according to peak usage in those areas. The byproduct of trying to do that, however, is that there's a lot of information, a lot of personal information that's being transferred. There's a lot of inferred information. So inferred information means things that people can find out based on the information that's being sent. So, one example that's been touted around is that, someone who has access to the information, someone who can intercept the information, could use that information to determine patterns about the homeowner's behavior. So peak usage, for example, might suggest that that's when the homeowner is home, that's when they're using information. The opposite side of that is that when there's a dip in usage or a significant dip in usage, the homeowner's not home. So that might be a peak time to be able to infiltrate access, right, in the person's home. And so this is just one, concrete example of how, in terms of this information being sent, when you are energy independent, if you insulate yourself from the risks associated with being connected to the grid in the traditional sense. There are consumer groups that raise the point about whether or not the information that's being sent is being sent in a secure manner, whether it's being encrypted from the consumer's home, which is one endpoint, to whatever servers or whatever stations are collecting that information, which is another endpoint, which would constitute endpoint-to-endpoint security. But until or unless there is legislation at the state or federal level that requires a standard for protecting that information, there's no way that homeowners can really be sure. I mean, what we know is that there doesn't seem to be legislation for that at a federal level. So homeowners aren't protected at that level. And depending on states, then because states have the right to legislate differently, that legislation is going to affect and protect people differently. So the way that people in New Jersey might be protected is going to be different from the way that people are protected in California or Texas or Ohio, for example.
Got it. And with that, we're going to take another quick break. And then as soon as we get back, we'll jump into some more insightful information and close everything out. Thanks for tuning in.
After Olu did the calculations, about 32% on a monthly basis. So that means that we'll be more savings long term. I just recently had a baby, so college is expensive. So with the money saved, I'll be able to make it easier for her.
All right, welcome back to the Sustainable Solar Podcast. Once again with our great guest here, Mr. Hughes. And as we close our conversation out today, just wanted to kind of just touch back on some of the segments we were talking about earlier as far as the smart meters. Right now, I know smart meters are something that a lot of homeowners are being taken advantage of right now. And, we kind of have, I personally have some mixed messages with homeowners who had some good, but also some very bad experiences with dealing with smart meters. And I know obviously that's a way to not have a physical person come and check the meter, but also information is being transmuted back and forth. which is putting a lot of people at risk. Just dig into that a little bit.
Sure. One of the issues that people are having, and I think you mentioned this, is that they're seeing an increase in their energy bill as a result of having the smart meter. Now, just to clarify, it's not because the smart meter is somehow costing more money or using more electricity. Peak usage usually occurs at night when everyone comes back home. And so, it's supply and demand. The more demand there is, then the higher the prices are going to be. So what energy companies are doing is they're figuring out in real time what that peak usage is, and they're able to charge for it in real time. And so this is why homeowners are seeing an increase in their energy bill. So again, when you have independent energy through, for example, solar and solar storage, then you're not using the energy that is circulating through the power company's grid. And as a result, the smart meter isn't reading and then transmitting that information. So zero energy used from the grid is essentially zero financial impact for the time that energy is used. It doesn't mean that there's zero information being transmitted. That information is still being transmitted. And that probably implicates a complicated situation where if, for example, someone who has a smart meter attached to their home, but is using solar, then that might seem as though, the person isn't home all the time. There's no hard rule that says that just because you have solar energy, that means that you have to maintain a smart meter on your home. For people who choose to go that route, they can say, you know what, I want to go 100% solar and I want to go completely off the grid. And they can do that, in which case the smart meter would come off. They would rely solely on solar energy, and they would achieve energy independence. A lot of people are trying to go that way. Some people have. I mean, I'm sure you've heard about the tiny home movement, where people are deciding that they want to live off the grid. People are doing that, and people are being able to sustain energy independence because they're not tied down to the grid. The byproduct for them is that they're learning how to live sustainably in all other areas of their life. And so it becomes easier because it's not just energy independence, but it's also financial independence as well, because they end up saving more money as they rely on the freely available energy from the sun.
Also, food independence as well. We've looked into some of these houses that are off the grid, and as you mentioned, not just energy, but financial, also food, and literally they do everything on their property. So they're completely self-sustainable.
Yes.
Right, and that's beautiful thing. I would ask, with everything the way it is today, and what's your outlook on if something were to happen, right? As far as some type of breach of information. If for homeowners who don't want to be susceptible to that, what would you recommend they do from an energy standpoint?
From an energy standpoint, I'm going to go a little left field here, but I'll point to the space station, right? Space station is floating up in space. It's not connected to the power grid here on Earth. They rely exclusively on solar energy. So to paint the picture, I think what we're seeing, the future of energy is likely going to be solar. At least it's going to, lean very heavily into solar. Again, the International Space Station is the size of a football field. Average homeowner's house might be a few thousand square feet. And so it doesn't require the same energy consumption as a space station that has to provide food, reusable drinking water, reusable air, all of these things. So the usage for solar energy is going to be significantly more manageable for homeowners. So to me, that says that solar energy is going to be something we're going to see more and more in homes. It'll probably become, just like every house has a refrigerator, every house is likely in the future going to have its own solar energy and solar storage capacities. For homeowners who are looking to achieve greater financial independence, greater energy independence, and greater security, greater protection, I think solar energy gives them all of those options. And the government provides rebates or incentives for solar as well. So as more homeowners adopt this seems increasingly, the way to go.
Okay, there we have it. Once again, thanks for plugging in to the Sustainable Solar Podcast. We also want to thank our guest, Mr. Hughes, for being a part of this podcast and sharing and enlightening us with all of the information that he has to share. So we definitely look forward to seeing you on the next podcast. So take care, take charge, and have a great day. Hey, thanks for watching this video. Please hit the subscribe and hit that bell to be informed about more videos just like this. If you like this video, please like, comment, and share. We would definitely love to hear your thoughts. Take care and have a bright day.